Hi guys, it's your girl Melissa at Mia Mo Mental Health, dropping gems about all different types of mental health topics. Now, if you're interested in anything, any topic you want me to cover, please leave a comment, please subscribe, please share, please be interactive, and let's all heal together during this healing journey. Have a great day. In this video, I want to discuss childhood trauma. I know a lot of us talk about different topics, different issues, and of course, we have the results of PTSD, anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, all of these diagnoses. But a lot of these things are rooted in our childhood trauma. A lot of us have different types of childhood trauma that showed up in us in different ways. This is why we know these are all symptoms of something that occurred in your childhood. The bottom line is to get to the root and to understand at the core who you are, because a lot of our childhood traumas are impacting us today, whereas though we feel haunted by them. This is why we have PTSD, right? This is why we have anxiety, depression, because more than likely it is rooted in our past. Childhood trauma can vary depending on what it is. And on top of that, sometimes we can be traumatized by our own parents. And this is not like a thing of like pointing the fingers at them, but if your parent wasn't really there present for you, they was always working, or hypothetically they was on drugs, or they just was an absent parent and you was left alone at a very young age to emotionally cope, that can be very dangerous, because as a child your brain is not fully developed until the age of 25. So if you have a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, 8-year-old that's left alone, or 8-year-old that's fending for themselves, that's really dangerous, because the individual cannot really fully think at a level of capacity. Now, just because we see children, let's say they communicate, right? They're active, they're talking. That does not mean they're at a level of adulthood. That does not mean they can be left alone. That does not mean they can be able to take on responsibilities that are beyond their years. This is why when I see, especially like certain, like the eldest sibling, when that individual takes on the leadership of the family due to like the stress of their parents, that individual will step up and actually assist their parent in regards to like taking care of the children and doing things that are mentally that they're not really responsible for. This can be dangerous, because now this individual is assuming a responsibility that's beyond her age, or even his age. And this is why we have to start talking about the core root of childhood trauma, because it is playing out in our adulthood. A lot of things that you're seeing in people's behavior is childhood trauma being played out in real life time in adulthood, and a lot of people cannot emotionally regulate because they was never taught the coping skills, how to regulate. Maybe your parents didn't know those things, or maybe you didn't have a safe space. Some people didn't have safe spaces, and when I mean safe spaces, just because your home was safe physically doesn't mean your home was safe emotionally, doesn't mean your home was safe spiritually. It doesn't mean you were safe with your own identity and you wasn't really able to really be yourself. A lot of people have homes and safe spaces, but they can't be fully authentically who they are due to their parents' rules, due to their parents' own idea of parenting, which can also hinder the individual from growing and propelling. So when we talk about childhood trauma, it's imperative that we understand what is happening. Was your voice silenced? Was you able to speak? Do you know anything about boundaries? And more than likely, because now mental health is on a rise, now these things been happening since the 80s, 60s, and 90s, and 2000, but now that we're understanding more, we have more education about mental health and about childhood trauma and about all of these things that impact us, we can now start healing as a community and understanding what went wrong in our childhood, so that way we can, be better for our children or our next generation, and not carry that with us. A lot of us only have these behaviors because we're carrying the trauma with us. We don't know how to let go from the trauma. We literally will identify with it. Whereas though to the point that you become engulfed with the trauma. And that is what's happening when we're talking about trauma, anxiety, depression. It literally will hijack time, because you're not focused on the present. You're so busy focused on only what occurred that you can't let it go. And in life, things are going to happen to all of us. Some are good, some are bad. It's just the occurrence of life, but how you respond to it is going to make all the difference of whether you're going to propel through your trauma or your differences or your setbacks as a child, or if you're going to get stuck in it. Even when I see clients that are substance abusers, I do not look at the abuse. I'm deeply thinking like, okay, something occurred emotionally, because that is a sign of you not liking yourself. A lot of people during childhood as well do not like themselves because they wasn't really able to be fully themselves. So having a good support system in order for you to be the best you can be is imperative. We can have sexuality childhood trauma, we can have religious childhood trauma, we can have emotional childhood trauma, we can have abandonment childhood trauma. It is so many different layers, because we as humans have so many layers to us. So it's going to be different ways, and sometimes we may not understand it all. But I want to give an example so that way you have an idea before I leave this video of what a childhood trauma may look like. I want to talk about abandonment wounds, because a lot of things are happening in abandonment. Whereas a person may say like, hey, I wasn't abandoned, my parents was there, but they was working all day. My mother was always at work and my dad was home, but my dad was in his room most of the time. Well, then personally, you kind of grew up by yourself. Although I understand, I'm not saying like anything negative about the parents, because we all have to do what we have to do. However, if a child is pretty much left alone, although there's an adult in the house, but that adult is not really watching the kid, the adult is not really interacting with the kid, then the child is literally being left alone, which is in a sense is like abandonment, like a neglect. And not in that sense, and this is why we gotta talk about it more in detail, because no one is really there for the child emotionally, mentally. Now maybe the mother, of course, she's like paying the bills, so physically she's making sure the house is taken care of, the food is in the fridge, that the child has clothing. But when it comes to her emotional support, when it comes to her mental support, when it comes to her, needing that guidance, she may not have that support. And her dad is always in the room, so she may not even think, right? I'm just using a child for example, and working class parents. What happens is that individual will start to grow up and will develop abandonment wound, whereas though they constantly are thinking that somebody's going to abandon them, whereas though like no one's going to be there, they have no one to talk to because they was always left alone. Although yes, their parents was there, but that codependency is also going to show up because in their relationship they never had a connection. So as human beings, we still want connection, but we want healthy connection. We don't want to be codependent on one individual and absorb all of our time to that individual. But abandonment wounds what can trigger codependency, because they are looking to connect. As humans, we all need to connect. And this is why it's important to talk to clinicians to understand what is happening with you individually. Now, every case is different. This is just an example of a child growing up in working class parents and really like feeling abandoned and without knowing, because no one is there. And not that they like abandoned the child, of course. The child is taken care of physically, but the child is not taken care of emotionally, mentally, and all of those things that you need in order to go. Who's building the child's confidence? Who's building the child's self-esteem? Who's building the child's motivation? Like these things, who is doing that for the child? And who's also paying attention? The child still needs attention in order to grow. The child needs to be nourished. But if no one has the time and it's always no one's really there to cultivate this thing in the child, then the child is left alone. Then eventually the child will develop codependencies, whereas though they're dependent on another because they never got their needs fully met as a child. Although their physical needs was met, but the different layers was not met. So that's a little bit about childhood trauma. I'm going to start doing different things about religious trauma, about codependency, about sexual abuse, and different topics. If this was interesting to you, please leave a comment, please share, please subscribe, or if you have a topic you want me to dive into, let's explore it together, because when it comes to mental health, it's layers to it. Bye.